Going to work and not getting paid sort of loses your motivation to even want to go to work in the first place. And so it's been a frustrating week for us. But today, we talked about us starting a new series on marriage covenant. And this, what I decided to do is a segue into the marriage covenant. What we've been talking about this fall are all the fall feasts, the fall holy days. And we talked about the Feast of Trumpets, which is the first of the fall holy days. And then we have the Day of Atonement. We've talked about Yom Kippur. And our final fall feast that we have is Sukkot, or also known as the Feast of Booths and the Feast of Tabernacles. And this one is actually going to be a segue into what we are ultimately going to start talking about, which is an ancient Hebrew marriage covenant, what that is, what it means, how people were betrothed. And the Feast of Tabernacles, as we're going to see and as we're going to talk through, is deeply entwined with this future marriage supper of the Lamb. And that's something that we have heard about in church, and I've heard it, depicted in several ways, but we all have this idea of being complete, of being whole, of being together, being gathered together, being dwelling in the place of God in a celebratory meal that we are having. So we all have these visual images of just how good that's going to be for us to come together in the marriage supper of the Lamb. But we're going to talk about what that even is and how this is connected to the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles. This year, that runs from October 6th to October 13th. So let's look at the biblical foundation of how this festival was set forth. And then this is in Deuteronomy. Celebrate the festival of tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. Be joyful at your festival, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns. For 7 days celebrate the festival to the Lord your God at the place the Lord will choose. For the Lord your God will bless you in all your harvest, in all the work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. So we see reading the instructions for this festival, it is unlike some of the other festivals that we have read. Specifically for the Day of Atonement, we talked about the days leading up to that being very solemn days where people are reflective of the sins that they've committed and are wanting to right the wrongs that they've done. But in the Festival of Tabernacles, it is a week-long celebration, and it's commanding, it's going to be joyful. You're going to come together. You're going to be bringing all of the harvest, all the things that you have grown and worked on throughout the year, and you're going to be coming together, and you're going to be celebrating for an entire week. So this is, again, a joyful celebration that is marked with food and with enjoying the fruit of your labor. This is also known as Sukkot. Again, it's a week-long celebration, and this begins 5 days after Yom Kippur. So what we've had is the Feast of Trumpets, and that has led into 10 days of awe, 10 days of repentance. And during that time, people are reflective of the sins that they have committed in preparing for the Day of Atonement, which is the only day of the year that the high priest, and only the high priest, can enter into the holiest of holies and perform a sacrifice. And this is a ritual sacrifice that is carried out, and we talked about the specifics of what is sacrificed and what is brought forth. And he puts blood on the mercy seat that forgives everyone of their sins. So we've went through this part of the fall feast, and now 5 days later, we're in a week-long celebration. We are coming together, people from all over, and we are eating and celebrating. Also, people built booths to remember how the Hebrew people lived under God's care 40 years in the wilderness. And this is set forth in the Bible as well and described. These are temporary structures that are built outside. The Bible describes specific plant material that's going to be decorating and covering these booths. And I have a picture, of course, a modern one that's being constructed here. And so people would make these, and throughout the week, they would go to them, sometimes live in them. And this is a reflection of the 40 years in the wilderness when the Hebrew nation has come out of Egypt, and they are in the wilderness, and they have nothing. They have nothing during this time. So God is providing for them in the wilderness when there is no houses. They are constantly moving, and so they are living in tents and in temporary dwelling structures. But throughout an entire 40 years, the Lord provides for them food. The Lord provides for them sustenance, sustainability. And so coming outside, building a sukkah, and coming outside into these temporary kind of booths and structures, it's a reflection of taking away all of the things that you kind of hold dear, your comfort zones, your warm blanket, your bed, your house. And I think of people that are very wealthy, that maybe own companies, are multimillionaires, who end up in the threat of losing their business and losing the things that they have attained. You hear about those people committing suicide. It's like everything that they have known and worked for, they're going to lose. And rather than face the consequences of what that's going to mean for them, they can't see beyond what they've created for themselves, and they take their lives. So having this temporary dwelling structure outside is taking away all of the comforts and all of the things that you've created, and you were outside with God, and God is providing for you. And it's just a simpler way. Like we get caught up in our day-to-day, in the things that we want, the things that we are looking for, our striving. But to strip that away and to have nothing, but to still have the beauty of the things that God has provided for us, this is a reflection of that, of still being able to find beauty in that, even though you don't have the things around you that you hold dear, as far as objects and as far as things, there is still a beauty and a provision that God has provided for you in your life. And you're coming and you're celebrating. So this is like a good time of, even though you don't have these things, even though that you're doing without, you are still doing with, because God is with you. So it's a symbol of God being ever faithful and being ever present, even in our times of need, even in our times of wilderness, when we don't have, God provides those things. And so I have here, when we have nothing in this world, we still have God. When we have nothing, and that is something, it's hard for us to grasp. And when we have things, it's easy for us to say this, but when those things are taken away, to still be able to appreciate God and what God has done for us, those are the times of struggle where we need to grasp this, that when we can't have these things, when these things have been taken from us, that we still have God, and we still have things to be thankful for that He has given us. So in Sukkot, it's the final harvest. This is also a shadow. And what I was saying, that I was going to use this as a segue, because what we're going to be talking about is marriage covenant, marriage supper of the Lamb. This is a shadow, this coming together is a shadow of what the marriage supper of the Lamb is going to be, which is the final harvest when all the nations will come together and share in the blessings of God's kingdom. When the harvest is reaped and everyone is coming together to celebrate in joyous occasion, being brought together in the presence of the Lord, where the presence of the Lord is fully realized. This is a feast that will occur in heaven, and it's going to be a time of great joy and of great celebration. So this connection of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, to the marriage supper of the Lamb is a prophetic connection. We've talked about each of the fall feasts and how they have prophetic implications, how they were commands of feasts that were placed before the Hebrew nation in order to celebrate, but how Jesus fulfilled these feasts and how they are a shadow of a prophecy of revelation, of something that is going to happen in the future. And so the Feast of Tabernacles is much like that, in that the Feast of Tabernacles is a shadow of the marriage supper of the Lamb. And I put this timeline out hesitantly because, Revelation is such a difficult book. It's a book that is written in a style of ancient apocalyptic Hebrew scripture. So it is written by the author John, who is describing a spiritual encounter, spiritual beings, and the revelation of things that he doesn't understand, but are of things to come. So when we read Revelation in our modern minds, we read it like a recipe book. This happens like this, and then this happens. And that's still kind of how I read it, and I certainly do not have a grasp on that book. But when we read it like that, it's difficult to fully understand what is being conveyed. So I found the most simple timeline on Google of Revelation, and I have included that here. And what we have is, when we talk about the marriage supper of the Lamb, in my mind, what I ask is, when are we going to have that? Where, what, and when is this marriage supper of the Lamb? So I have overlaid on this timeline, according to the Bible, when the marriage supper of the Lamb is to occur. It's to occur before the return of Christ to the earth, but after the rapture. So we are called up to meet him, and before Christ descends to earth for his second coming, there is going to be the celebration of the marriage supper of the Lamb. And you think, well, does this graph apply if, the rapture is going to occur before the tribulation or during the tribulation? And that's where you get into conversations and where people will say pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib. And anytime I heard those, I had no idea what anybody was talking about, because I'm a very visual person. So in my mind, when they said that, it's just these arbitrary designations on a timeline that I have no idea about. It's about when John's giving me directions and telling me places, and I'm like, I don't know where those places are. It just totally escaped me. So, the rapture, the word rapture is actually comes from a Latin word, and it's like to take away, to snatch away. So the word rapture is never actually in the New Testament, but its concept is there. And this idea of us being raptured before tribulation is actually more of a modern type of theology that has developed, I want to say, in the 1800s. I may be incorrect about that. So really pretty recently. And so it's this idea that that people who are saved, who have accepted Jesus, are going to escape a time of tribulation, that they are going to be raptured and taken away, and that they are going to escape the 7 seal judgments, the trumpets, the bowls of wrath, that they are going to, because of their salvation, that they are not going to endure the tribulation and suffering that is going to occur. So if you look on this timeline here, you see the seal judgments, you see the trumpet judgments, and the bowl judgments. So people would say who attribute a rapture theology or a pre-tribulation theology, that the rapture is going to occur for all believers before this tribulation begins. And something else that I didn't really think about fully, when I think about tribulation, I think about a really long time span. But in the Bible, it describes tribulation as occurring for 7 years. And there are a lot of 7s in Revelation. And this is with intent, because the number 7 is an important Hebrew number, meaning a time of completion. So it's like there's 7s upon 7s upon 7s that's happening in Revelation. And it's just a symbol of, like this is the end of time. What is being started is being made complete. And there's repetition of this. So tribulation is to last 7 years. There are people that attribute or believe in a mid-tribulation, that before the tribulation is over, that people who are saved will be raptured up to meet him in the air. And then there are, of course, the people who believe in post-tribulation. But what we've read about and what is outlaid in the Bible in Revelation is before Jesus comes back to earth, when we have been taken up, then that is when we are going to participate in the marriage supper of the Lamb. And I'm not trying to say that I have this laid out and understood, and this is, you all should believe in any one particular thing. I really feel like, the book of Revelation it wasn't understood by John when it was delivered to him, and it's something that we have to dwell on and try and begin to understand. And like I said, it's so difficult because we read it like a recipe book, a literal timeline of things that's supposed to occur. But then when you're reading it, it goes back in time, so you kind of are confused about where you're at. But I think in order for us to begin to understand something complicated, we have to begin to understand it at a simple level. So what I want you to just understand and begin to grasp is this tribulation that occurs for 7 years, that some people believe that believers will be taken before tribulation occurs, some people during, and then some people after it's completed. But the marriage supper of the Lamb is like a definite date on this timeline that is going to occur regardless as to whatever rapture theology that we decide to believe. That this is a celebration of all believers that occurs in heaven before Jesus comes back to earth. So we're talking about the Feast of Tabernacles, and we've talked about how this is a shadow of the marriage supper of the Lamb that is going to happen in heaven as depicted in Revelation. And I think when we think about the Feast of Tabernacles, I didn't really have any real references for it. I felt like it was, I felt like it was I don't want to say unimportant, but I guess because I didn't realize what it was, I didn't see the importance in it. So I want us to look back and kind of dig into the biblical references to the Feast of Tabernacles and see that this was not just a command that was in, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, but the people followed this. People followed this, and even Jesus celebrated it. So this is what I want to talk about now. So we're going to recount the celebration of this feast in the Old Testament. And we read about the Feast of Tabernacles as celebrated in the Old Testament in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And I found this interesting. When we look through our Bibles, we find that Ezra and Nehemiah are in their own separate books. But what is thought is that there was perhaps one author that wrote both Ezra and Nehemiah. And what they are writing about is the recounting of the history and what has happened after the few Israelites and Hebrews came back to Jerusalem. So what's happened is Jerusalem has had a series of kings. They've split into the northern kingdom, into the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom gets bombarded, and the entire Jewish nation, that's where we talk about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They get pulled off into all different places. It's called a diaspora. It's the separation of those 10 northern tribes. And then you have the southern kingdom that still exists, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And so they have a series of different kings, and it's when you read in the Old Testament that, they were good, or they followed the ways of their father and did what was wrong. And so you have a series of escalation of separation of the Jewish nation from what God has commanded. So they are rebelling. They're doing whatever they want to do. And as they get more and more chaotic and further away from what God has wanted, God is saying, I'm going to allow Babylon to come in and to take your kingdom. You're going to be taken away. You're going to be punished because you have failed to look for me. You have worshipped other gods. And so no longer am I, your God, going to protect you from the people that are wanting to overtake you. I'm going to allow this to happen because you've rejected me. You don't want me. If you don't want me, you don't want my protection. So Babylon came and captured, and they have burnt down. They have destroyed the wall. In those times when you win over a place in battle, then you destroy all that is there, and you separate the people who live there all across. Because you are looking at the survivors, you are separating. You are looking at not only destroying the place, but it's destroying the possibility of them being able to gather back and to reassimilate. It's like you're just desolating them. So that's what's happened. And during this time, a lot of the people, a lot of the Jewish nation is taken into Babylon. And so and this is, prophesied that this is going to occur for 70 years. But before this 70 years is complete, in about 50 years of captivity, there are a select few people, one person in particular, Zerubbabel, who wants to go back and who desires to rebuild the temple. And he has a place of authority with the king. And, and God orchestrates this as well, that he allows Zerubbabel 50 years after this conquest. And you think back in your mind 50 years ago, how long that is. And he has a desire to return and to rebuild the temple. So it begins with Zerubbabel doing this. And then years later, Ezra is a prophet who comes back and reestablishes the Torah. He is a Levite, a descendant of Aaron, and this people have perpetually been committed to keeping the law. So they keep what is written, all of the commands, all of the scrolls that they have available. This is the Levite's job. This is what God has commanded them to do, and they stay faithful in this. So Ezra has the Torah, and he has all of these commands. Ezra comes back, and he enlightens the people and reads from the Torah and tells them what they're supposed to do here. So Zerubbabel's come back, and they've started reconstructing the temple. which was in nowhere as great as the beautiful temple that Solomon had built with, all of this gold. They are rebuilding the temple with what they have available, but they see that there is a purpose and that it needs to be built because this is a dwelling place of God. So Zerubbabel comes back and do this, but Ezra has the Torah, and Ezra has the information that they need, the instructions for what are we supposed to do in this temple. And then later we read about Nehemiah, and I know John likes to preach on Nehemiah, and Nehemiah is responsible for building the wall back around the walls of the city for protection. So each one of these men come back. And Evelyn, I hope you like my AI image of these three men. They didn't all exist or live necessarily at the same time, but they all had a part in coming back and building parts of the temple back and reinstating the law. So Zerubbabel's built the temple. Ezra is educating people on the Torah. You all can imagine, okay, if we were taken away in captivity to another place that didn't have church, that didn't have worship services, and 50 years later we're all gathered back into a place, into a church that we've constructed, and it's kind of like, what do we do? What do we do here? But they have the Torah, which tells you exactly what you need to do. And this is what is being described in Nehemiah chapter 8, 13 through 18. On the second day of the month, the heads of all the families, along with the priests and the Levites, gathered around Ezra the teacher to give attention to the words of the law. They found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded through Moses, that the Israelites were to live in temporary shelters during the festival of the 7th month, and that they should proclaim this word and spread it throughout their towns and in Jerusalem. Go out into the hill country and bring back branches from olive and wild olive trees, and from myrtles, palms, and shade trees, to make temporary shelters, as it is written. So the people went out and brought back branches and built themselves temporary shelters on their own roofs, in their courtyards, in the courts of the house of God, and in the square by the water gate, and one by the gate of Ephraim. The whole company that had returned from exile built temporary shelters and lived in them. From the days of Joshua son of Nun until that day, the Israelites had not celebrated it like this, and their joy was very great. Day after day, from the first day to the last, Ezra read from the book of the law of God. They celebrated the festival for 7 days, and on the 8th day, in accordance with the regulation, there was an assembly. So that just seems like you can just, I don't know, in your minds, if you can picture the joy of this celebration, of them being in exile, of them finally coming back and being in the midst of a destroyed city that was once the pinnacle of that Near Eastern, Middle Eastern culture and lifestyle. They were the epitome, they were the conquerors, and all of that had been destroyed. And they came back into the rubble of this to attempt to build it back. And they built these temporary structures. And Ezra is reading from the Torah the things that had been commanded, and they are celebrating this together. It's just, you can just imagine in your mind the joy that is happening with these people as they are realizing their ties to one another and what God has commanded them to do. They are being united in purpose and seeing that the things that matter the most are not things. So we read about that in the Old Testament, and you think, well, that's the Old Testament. We don't live under the law anymore. But Jesus celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles, and I think that you all will find this interesting. Jesus goes to the Festival of Booths. This is the title in the Bible translation that I was reading here, the Festival of Booths. So this is the Feast of Tabernacles, also known today as Sukkot. And we read about this in John chapter 7. And I always found this exchange interesting. Jesus later traveled throughout Galilee. He didn't want to travel in Judea because Jews there wanted to kill him. The time for the Jewish festival of booths was near, so Jesus' brothers told him, "Leave this place and go to Judea so that your disciples can see the things that you're doing. No one does things in secretly when he wants to be known publicly. If you do these things, you should let the world see you." Even his brothers didn't believe in him. So what's happening here, it says Jesus was traveling throughout Galilee, but he didn't want to travel to Judea because people there wanted to kill him. His time had not yet come. He didn't want to go to where this festival was going on because people were going to target him and wanting to kill him. And his brothers, who didn't believe that he was the true Son of God, is saying, if you have a message, why are you trying to hide down here? Go to where everybody is and preach it. If this is the truth, if you want your message to be known, this is the time and place to do it because everybody's here. And this is what Jesus told them. Jesus told them, "Now is not the right time for me to go. Any time is right for you. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I say what everyone does is evil. Go to the festival. I'm not going to this festival right now. Now is not the right time for me to go." After saying this, Jesus stayed in Galilee. And so we will read later that Jesus going to the festival. And when I read this at first, I was like, was Jesus being misleading? Was he lying when he said he wasn't going to go? Because in my mind, I'm thinking this is a festival, this is a day. This is a day, and he said, "I'm not going up there," but he really did go up there in the same day. When really this is a festival that occurs over the course of 7 days, and he's saying, "I'm not going to go up right now. Now is not the time for me to go." But later, he makes his appearance and begins preaching his message. So I guess just initially me not knowing what this was and him saying he wasn't going to go, but it wasn't like that there was a party to attend and he said, "I'm not going to go to the party," and then he shows. This is a week-long festival where certain things are done throughout the week. So let's look at the things that are done. They have built booths, they have built structures, they are outside eating and celebrating and enjoying themselves. And at this time, at the time of Jesus, we still have the temple. We still have, and that's the whole purpose. This is the place that God has commanded them, and the place that God has commanded them is where the temple is. So there are two things that they do at the end of this festival that it's not written in the Bible, but these are traditions that occurred within the Jewish community that they did at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles here. One is that lamps were lit all around the temple. All around the temple. There were torches, and they lit it up through the night. And this is on the last day, the 7th day. And also on the 7th day, water is poured on the altar. So these are two meaningful things that happen at the end of this feast, and I want to look into these just a little bit more. So giant golden lampstands were lit. People lit torches around the temple, indicating that the Messiah would be a light to the Gentiles. So it's like, why are they just lighting it up? Do they think it looks nice? Do they think it looks pretty? Maybe, but there's also a biblical understanding that they have. And this comes from Isaiah 49:6. "Is it too small a thing for you to be my servant to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept? I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." So we understand that verse in Isaiah as meaning something completely different with Jesus' fulfillment and with his death. But for the people at that time, for the Jewish people at that time, they were looking at themselves as, it says that they were going to be a light to the Gentiles. So this is, the lighting of the torches is a shining and a representation of the light that the Jewish nation themselves felt like they were going to be to everyone else. So that's the torches. And then the water on the altar. The priests carried water from the pool of Siloam, which is also, in English, that would be the well of scent, to the temple, and poured it over the altar on the last day to signify the rains to come for the land and the whole earth knowing God as the water covers the sea. And this comes from 2 verses here, both in Isaiah. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And with joy you will draw from the wells of salvation. So this pool is at the bottom of Jerusalem. And they would go, and the priest would take a pitcher of water, and they would march in procession back up to the temple, and they would pour the water over the altar. This pool of Siloam, it was at the bottom of Jerusalem. This is a protected freshwater source of water that was built by King Hezekiah. So this is an ancient fresh water source, and fresh water and being able to have access to clean drinking water was as important then as it is now. In 2 Chronicles, it talks about Hezekiah. It was Hezekiah who blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon spring and channeled the water down to the west side of the city of David. He succeeded in everything he undertook. So you see here is a map, a picture of the Gihon spring. It is located toward the top. You'll see Warren Shaft, and right under that, Gihon spring and pool. This is it's a spring, a naturally intermittently gushing water source that arises from a cave. And you can see it's on the outskirts of the city. So this would be a place that could be targeted by people who were trying to overtake the city. If they destroyed the only freshwater source that the city had, then it could destroy the whole city. So King Hezekiah redirected this water into the pool of Siloam. And you can see that is at the base of Jerusalem here. And this original spring at the northern part here is where King David and Solomon are anointed. So it holds very special meaning. So the priests are going to this pool, to this freshwater source of water, and it's also known as the well of scent. And also the well of scent, and let's see. And also from this verse here in Isaiah, with joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. So this is the verse that they are using as inspiration to take this water and to pour it over the altar on the last day on the Feast of Tabernacles. So it is on this day when we read about, Jesus is saying, I'm not going to go to the festival right now. But he ends up going on a later date, and he begins to preach. And it's on the day that the water is being poured on the altar. And as I said, you can imagine the priests and the people getting the pitcher of water from the pool of Siloam, and they're walking back up to the temple in procession to pour this water over the altar. And it is on this day that Jesus says, now on the last day of the festival, Hosanna Rabbah, Yeshua stood and cried out, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever puts his trust in me, as the scripture says, rivers of living water will flow from his inmost being. So when we read that, we're so inspired by hearing, what Jesus is saying, rivers of living water. But this is all in the context of this last day of this festival with water being poured on the altar. That just has deeper meaning that we don't even realize. That's, anchored and founded in these verses of Isaiah of salvation being sent. And when the water is being poured on the altar on this day, Jesus is saying, if anyone is thirsty, come to me. He who drinks from this water will never be thirsty again. It's the well of salvation, and that's what he is communicating and bringing forth on this day that we completely didn't know the context of. And not only that, Not only that, but this is also in Revelation. Revelation chapter 21, 6 through 8. And he said to me, "It is done. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for the murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death." So this idea of the water, it's the water of salvation, the water that if we accept the message that Jesus has brought to us, that he is the Son of God, that his death was payment for our sins, that he stood in our place, if we accept that and have faith and hope in that, then we have drunk from that well of living water, and that we will live eternally and experience this marriage supper of the Lamb that we're going to talk about later. So I'm going to end there. The other portion that I want to talk about, we talked about the two celebratory endings of the last day of Sukkot, and one is the water being poured on the altar. The other one is the torches being lit. So I'm going to end up next week, and we're going to finish out the torches being lit, and then we're going to get into talking about ancient Hebrew marriage ceremonies. And again, I think once we begin to look into that, it will really open your eyes to a lot of scripture that has marriage talk, like marriage references. Now, when we read those marriage references, we think in the terms of modern marriage references. But this was delivered and intended for people that had a completely different process for marriage. So once we understand that, I really feel like it will help open your eyes to not only God's faithfulness to you, but how you can remain faithful to him as well. Hey, amen. Thank you.